I was repainting the porch railing when my phone buzzed on the step beside me. I almost ignored it. My hands were covered in white paint, the afternoon sun was warm on my back, and Grandma had just brought out 2 glasses of sweet tea like she used to when I was 7 years old. It was the kind of quiet Saturday I hadn't had in months. Then I saw who the text was from. My brother. "Hey sis, just so you know, me and Diane are moving to Scottsdale. Already transferred what we needed from the estate account. Don't make this weird. You always knew the property was going to be split eventually anyway. Take care of yourself." I read it twice, then a third time. Then I set my phone face down on the step, picked up my paintbrush, and finished the section I was working on. Because here's the thing my brother didn't know. The estate account he thought he'd just emptied had been sitting at exactly $47.12 since Thursday morning. I know because I put it there. Every meaningful dollar had already been moved somewhere he couldn't touch. But let me back up, because the way the story ends only makes sense if you understand how it started. My grandmother raised me, not in a dramatic, my parents were terrible way, though that's also somewhat true, but in the practical sense that she was simply the most present person in my life from the time I was about 4 years old. My mother, her daughter, was in and out, more out than in. My father was a name on a document somewhere. My brother Marcus was 7 years older than me, which meant that by the time I was old enough to form memories of him, he was already a teenager who thought family dinners were optional and borrowing money was a personality trait. Grandma had a house in a small town in North Carolina. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, half an acre of garden that she maintained with a consistency I've never been able to replicate in my own houseplants, and a detached workshop where she restored furniture for extra income until she was 73. She was sharp. She was funny. And she had spent decades building something modest but real, a paid-off house, a small investment account, and a life insurance policy that was nobody's business but hers, and eventually her estate attorney's. I moved back to take care of her when I was 26. I had been living in Charlotte working in hospital billing administration, which sounds boring until you realize it means I understand exactly how money moves through systems, who has authorization to do what, and how quickly things can go wrong when someone decides the rules don't apply to them. I gave up my apartment, transferred to a remote position with a pay cut I could just barely absorb, and came home because Grandma had started having small falls, and I was the only one who noticed. Marcus didn't offer to help. Marcus called twice in the first year, both times to ask how she was doing in a tone that suggested he was really asking something else. His wife Diane had opinions about inheritance that she occasionally let slip in group texts she forgot I was still part of. By the time I had been living with Grandma for about 8 months, I had a fairly complete picture of the situation. The house was worth somewhere between $280,000 and $310,000, depending on the market. The investment account held around $160,000, built slowly over 40 years of careful living. The life insurance policy was separate and already had a designated beneficiary, me, which Grandma had done years ago and which Marcus did not know about. What Marcus did know, because Grandma had made the mistake of mentioning it during one of his rare phone calls, was that the investment account existed and that it would be part of the estate. He also knew that under North Carolina intestate rules, if Grandma died without a clear, updated will, her children, meaning my mother, who was effectively unreachable, and potentially other relatives could have claims. What he was banking on, I think, was confusion. He wanted the process to be messy enough that whoever shouted loudest got the most. What he hadn't counted on was me having a relationship with Grandma's estate attorney. Her name was Patricia, and she had handled Grandma's documents for almost 15 years. I had met her twice before moving back and about 6 times in the first year of living there. We updated the will. We clarified the power of attorney. We made sure that every account had the right designations, the right authorizations, and the right protections in place. It wasn't dramatic. It was just paperwork. The kind of paperwork that matters enormously when someone decides to test it. The first sign that Marcus was planning something came about 4 months before that Saturday text. He called more frequently. That should have been a relief. But the calls had a quality to them I didn't like. He was asking questions that felt less like concern and more like reconnaissance. How was Grandma doing? Had there been any new health issues? Was she still sharp mentally? Had she talked about the house lately? Did she have a preference about what happened to the property? I answered neutrally. I didn't lie, but I didn't elaborate. Then Diane slipped up in a group text. She was complaining to her sister. I assume she forgot I'd been added to that thread 2 Christmases ago for a gift coordination thing and never removed, about how the situation in North Carolina was taking forever to resolve, and how they had put their whole Scottsdale plan on hold, waiting for things to become clearer. She mentioned a specific number. It was close enough to the value of the investment account that I felt my stomach go cold. I didn't respond to that thread. I screenshotted it and forwarded it to my own email. The next week, Marcus called and asked, very casually, whether Grandma had ever added him to any of her accounts. Just in case of emergency, he said. In case something happened and I wasn't reachable. Just practical, he said. I told him I'd have to ask her. I didn't ask her. Instead, I called Patricia that same afternoon. We had a long conversation. At the end of it, I had a clear understanding of exactly which accounts Marcus could theoretically access based on their current setup, what the exposure was, and what steps I could take, with Grandma's full knowledge and consent, to address it. Grandma, when I explained the situation, was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I always knew that boy watched my accounts the way a crow watches a picnic. She signed what needed to be signed. We updated the account structures. The investment account was moved into a trust with specific terms. The checking account that had previously held estate-adjacent funds was reduced to a nominal balance. I did not tell Marcus any of this. I also documented everything, not because I'm paranoid, but because I work in billing administration and I have seen what happens when there's no paper trail. I kept a folder. Emails, call logs, the screenshots from Diane's group text, every document Patricia prepared. I kept it in 2 places, a physical folder in my car and a cloud backup. Then I waited. It didn't take long. On a Thursday morning, Marcus called and asked if he could have the login for the household account, the one he assumed held the bulk of the liquid assets, because he wanted to make sure he could keep an eye on things if anything happened to me. I told him I'd text him the information later. I sent him the login for the account that held $47.12. That was all that was in it. Had been all that was in it since we restructured things 6 weeks earlier. I just hadn't bothered to mention that part. 2 days later, Saturday afternoon, porch railing, paint, sweet tea, his text. I read it 4 times now. Already transferred what we needed from the estate account. He had tried to transfer from an account with $47. I want you to understand the specific quality of the silence that followed in my own mind. It wasn't triumph exactly. It was more like watching someone walk very confidently into a screen door they didn't see. There's a half second before they react where they still think they're outside. I finished painting the section I was on. I drank my sweet tea. I helped Grandma bring the glasses back inside. Then I went to my room, opened my laptop, and checked the account activity log. He had attempted a transfer of $90,000. The transaction had been flagged, held, and then rejected because the account held insufficient funds and because the trust structure on the real accounts had been set up specifically to require dual authorization from both me and Patricia's office for any transfer above $500. The bank had sent a standard notification. No drama. Just a quiet, bureaucratic wall. I sat with that for a minute. Then I called Patricia. Then I called my grandmother into the room and held her hand while I explained what Marcus had tried to do. She was not surprised. She was tired in the way people get tired when something they feared is finally confirmed. Well, she said, at least now we know. I texted Marcus back. 3 sentences. The account you accessed holds $47.12. The funds you're looking for were moved into a protected trust 6 weeks ago. If you have questions, Patricia's office can explain the terms. He called immediately. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was long and loud and used words like blindsided and not fair, and this isn't what Grandma would want. At one point, he mentioned that he and Diane had already put a deposit down on a place in Scottsdale. I texted Patricia the voicemail transcript. She added it to the file. Marcus and Diane did not move to Scottsdale. Or rather, they moved and then apparently had to unmove because 2 weeks later, I got a call from my mother. The first call in 11 months asking if I knew what was going on with Marcus. He had told her I had frozen him out of his rightful inheritance and that Grandma was being manipulated. My mother, to her limited credit, sounded uncertain rather than accusatory. She said, "That doesn't sound like Mama." I said, "It isn't. Do you want to talk to her directly?" I handed Grandma the phone. I left the room. I don't know everything that was said, but Grandma talked for about 20 minutes, and when she came back to the kitchen, her chin was set in a way I recognized as final. Marcus called me 6 more times over the next month. I answered twice. Both conversations were versions of the same negotiation he kept trying to open. Some arrangement, some payment, some acknowledgement that he was owed something. I listened. I didn't agree. The second time, I told him clearly that the trust documents were filed, the terms were fixed, and his options were to respect them or involve a lawyer, and that if he involved a lawyer, he should understand that we had documentation going back 14 months that Patricia was prepared to produce. He didn't involve a lawyer. I want to be honest about how this actually felt, because I think people expect a story like this to have a clean, satisfying ending, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it does, and this one was somewhere in between. The money was protected. Grandma's house, her garden, her workshop, her 40 years of careful living, all of it was protected. That part was clean and satisfying. Patricia sent me a short email that just said, "Well done," and I printed it out and put it on my refrigerator because I am apparently the kind of person who does that. But Marcus is still my brother. That doesn't stop being true because he tried to steal from an old woman who raised me. And there's a particular grief in finally having confirmed in the most concrete possible terms that someone you grew up with was never really on your side. I didn't cry about it immediately. I cried about it about 3 weeks later in the car, on the way back from picking up Grandma's prescriptions, listening to a song I couldn't even tell you the name of. Just sat in a parking lot for about 10 minutes. Grandma knew something was wrong when I came in with the bags. She didn't ask. She just made chamomile tea and put it in front of me and sat down across the table like she used to do when I was a kid and had had a hard day at school. "You did right," she said. "Doing right doesn't always feel like winning." I've thought about that sentence a lot since then. Marcus and I don't speak now. I didn't issue an ultimatum or have a dramatic final conversation. It just stopped. He stopped calling after about the 6th week. I didn't reach back out. There's a particular silence that settles in when a relationship has been this clearly defined. When someone has shown you exactly what they were willing to do and you've shown them exactly what you'd prepared for. There isn't much left to say after that. My mother and I have talked 3 times in the last 4 months, which is more than the previous 2 years combined. She's not someone I'll ever fully rely on, but she asked how Grandma was doing in a way that sounded like she actually wanted to know, and that's something. Grandma is doing well, slower than she was, but still sharp. She's been teaching me to restore furniture in the workshop on Saturday afternoons, which is how I spend most of my Saturdays now. A little sawdust, a little varnish, her explaining the difference between wood types in a tone that suggests I should already know this. I'm learning. She laughs at my mistakes in a way that doesn't feel unkind. The porch railing, for what it's worth, looks great. 2 coats, clean edges. Grandma said it was the best it had looked in years. I told her I had good motivation to finish the job properly. That Saturday. She asked what I meant. I told her I'd been a little distracted by a text message. She thought about that for a second. Then she said, "Did you finish your tea first?" I said I had. She nodded like that was the correct answer. Here's what I learned, or maybe what I was reminded of, through all of this. The people who feel entitled to what you've built are rarely the people who helped you build it. They show up at the end with a sense of ownership they constructed entirely in their own heads, and they count on you being too caught off guard, too guilty, too attached to the idea of family harmony to push back. What they miscalculate sometimes is the person who loves the right things enough to prepare. I didn't move fast when Marcus sent that text. I didn't panic. I didn't call him immediately to argue or explain or defend. I painted the porch railing. I drank the sweet tea my grandmother made. I let the plan I had already built do the work it was already doing. The transfer failed before I finished that cup. Some things you protect quietly, over time, before anyone realizes they need protecting. That's not coldness. That's love with a longer memory. If you're in a situation where you're watching someone circle something that matters to you, a home, an inheritance, a person you're responsible for, don't wait for the moment they make their move to start thinking. The time to think is before that. Get the documents in order. Know who the attorney is. Understand the account structures. Create the paper trail. Not because family should be a legal transaction, but because the moment it becomes necessary to have protected yourself, you will be very grateful that you did. And finish your tea first. Whatever's happening can usually wait the 10 minutes it takes to sit with someone who loves you and drink something warm. The problems will still be there. You'll handle them better when you're not running on adrenaline and a skipped lunch. Grandma's porch looks good this time of year. I repainted the shutters last month. She's already asking about the garden beds. I've got nowhere else I'd rather be.